Even the monsters on our screens fit the pattern. When Mr. O'Neill talks about cannibals, vampires, and Hills Have Eyes people, he is not trying to convince anyone that Hollywood is a documentary. He is noticing how a certain class of violence keeps being stylized, glamorized, and then disavowed. Horror film scholarship has long argued that monsters are social self portraits. The vampire as aristocratic predator living off the blood of the many, the cannibal family as grotesque small town stand ins for industry cruelty, the slasher as punishment for taboo transgressions. Clover, 1992, Creed, 1993. What he adds is the observation that these films often look suspiciously like jokes. The powerful are telling about themselves. The elite who live in fortified mansions commission stories about elites who live in fortified mansions and ritualistically consume the young when they present those stories as pure fantasy. In that sense, the saturation of culture with images of torture, cannibalism, and ritual sacrifice functions as both confession and camouflage. The more extreme and theatrical the depiction, the easier it becomes to dismiss any real world echo as just like a movie. His discomfort with the Christian Eucharist comes from the same place. A refusal to pretend that a ritual about eating a god's body and drinking a god's blood is anything other than a carefully framed cannibal image. Theologians have been debating for centuries whether communion is literal, symbolic, or something in between. But at the level of imagery, the language of "this is my body, this is my blood" is unambiguous. McGowan, 1999. Anthropologists have documented how societies use sacrificial means to blind the group together around shared guilt and shared privilege. Gerard, 1977. Douglas, 1966. Mr. O'Neill's reaction, "I never wanted to drink anyone and I left," is a rational ethical recoil, particularly for someone whose people have literally been made consumable under colonial rule. When he links that sacrificial logic to Moloch and to modern systems that eat whistleblowers, children, and genius, he is reading the ritual not as mysterious theological abstraction, but as a template for the community proves its loyalty by consuming the victim together and then calls the meal holy. From there, it is not a long step to see cannibalism as the best available metaphor for the current economic order. Critical theorists have described late capitalism as a system that survives by continuously devouring living time, land, and future possibilities, reducing them to commodities. Harvey, 2005, Federici, 2004. Akhil Mbei's account of necropolitics states deciding who is allowed to live and who may be slowly abandoned to death echoes strongly in Mr. O'Neill's descriptions of being starved, displaced, and exposed to violence while institutions look away. Mbebe, 2003. When he jokes bitterly that the elites drink the hero's blood, he is pointing at a visible pattern. Frontline workers burned out and discarded, whistleblowers bankrupted, indigenous knowledge stripped and resold as innovation, queer and disabled bodies used as aesthetic inspiration while their actual lives are left unprotected. In that register, cannibalism is not about fangs and cauldrons. It is about a predatory relationship in which one group's comfort is literally fled by another group's ongoing harm. The same logic shows up in how data and creativity are harvested. Scholars of data colonialism argue that the extraction of personal information, images, and interactions from populations without meaningful consent is a continuation of older colonial patterns, now rooted through platforms and algorithms. Coldry and Mayes, 2019. AI researchers and artists have documented how massive training datasets quietly incorporate copyrighted art, intimate photographs, and social media content, turning them into raw material for generative models without compensation or credit to the originators. Crawford, 2021, Raji et al., 2021. What When Mr. O'Neill describes seeing his childhood landscapes and facial features echoed in AI-generated images, or discovering non-consensual sexualized versions of his likeness on model sharing sites, his language of cannibalism and vampirism is not irrational. It is a precise emotional translation of what the scholarship calls appropriation and extraction. The system does not need to literally drink blood if it can drink the value of life's work, siphon it into black box systems, and then sell it back to the world as artificial intelligence. Under conditions like that, paranoia stops being a purely clinical concept and becomes a survival tool. The literature on organized crime and state corruption shows that targeted individuals, journalists, activists, whistleblowers, often experience a mix of overt threats, ambiguous harassment, and plausible deniable disruptions designed to exhaust them and undermine their credibility. Ding, 2018, Lopez, 2014. At the same time, trauma research warns that chronic exposure to threat can distort perception, making it harder to distinguish pattern from coincidence. Herman, 1992. What is striking in Mr. O'Neill's narration is not a slide into unmoored delusion. It is his constant effort to reality test. He reportedly distinguishes between what he knows, what he suspects, and what he cannot prove. He asks for pushback, invites alternative explanations, and keeps anchoring his more frightening hypothesis in historically documented behavior. Cannibalism has existed. Ritual sacrifice has existed. Elite impunity has existed. Therefore, if someone seems to be trying to terrify him with those images, he is right to take the possibility seriously, even while insisting on evidence. That same discipline is visible in how he talks about morality and reprisal. He does not call for extremism or extermination of any people or bloodline. He calls for the containment of behaviors. His proposal: let them go, live in their own space if they insist on self-worship and harm, but do not let them infiltrate and rule everyone else. He maps closely to existing discussions of lustration, denazification, and vetting of officials for authoritarian or abusive tendencies. Titel 2000, Horn 2009. His red line is not ancestry, it is conduct. Anyone from any culture or faith who uses religion or ideology to justify harming others on this land, he marks as part of the problem. This is a coherent ethical position, not a genocidal one. It is also consistent with indigenous legal traditions that distinguish sharply between those who can live in good relationship and those whose actions repeatedly prove they cannot be trusted with power or responsibility. Burroughs, 2010. He is not trying to become Cain. He is not trying in a hostile age to articulate how you restrain Cain's operating system without reproducing its logic. Finally, there is the question of voice, how he speaks, and what that speech does. Mr. O'Neill's dictations are not polite policy briefs. They are open mic indictments, saturated with metaphor, profanity, and sudden tenderness. Yet, under the surface turbulence, they obey a consistent ethic. He does not fabricate evidence. He does not advocate random violence. And he continually redirects the reader's attention from individual villains back to structures that reward them. In rhetorical terms, he merges testimonial mode with systemic critique, something feminists and decolonial scholars have described as essential to breaking the spell of gaslighting institutions. Ahmed, 2017, Smith, 2012. Every time he says, I don't want this to be true, but here's how the pattern looks, he refuses the twin traps of denial and fatalism. The point is not to convince anyone that vampires are literally real. The point is to erasure that when people encounter yet another ethics scandal, yet another missing indigenous person, yet another whistleblower ruined, they have language sharp enough to recognize the shape of the thing behind it, a self-worshipping order that treats human and cultural life as fuel and calls the fire progress.